overdone, probably all the emotion. Anyway, so the next thing you know, I'm in trouble. And they say, and I had all this other, and in the meantime, there was this guy, we'll call him Donald Wright. And he had become chief of the communications center. And I used to go in early to find out, the major things that had been happening in the comm center. And at one point, there were some guys pitching pennies. It's a game. You pitch pennies against a wall. It's kind of a gambling, and then it turned into a fight. And he comes in, and he sits at the table with Brookie and two other guys. And I'm listening to, that was a big thing of the shift. They had a scuffle, a fight downtown, several men. And he says, that's ends, just ending. You know what I'm saying? He used the N word. He said, oh, that's just ends, ending. Or entering, I don't want to say the word, but you know what I'm saying. And I thought, here's this guy dressed up in dress blues, and this is the way he talks. Well, another time, his secretary came through the comm center and said, Chief Donald White will not be coming in tonight because he's getting a vasectomy, So this on and on, right? Well, everybody sort of began to find out that I had a crush on this detective, and I was infatuated, and then I wouldn't let it go. If I had let it go, if there had been an HR department that said, Mary, this guy, he doesn't like the cut of your jib. They did a little bit. He doesn't like the cut of your jibs and blah, blah, blah. I would have said, oh, okay. And if I had woke up and realized this man's not interested in you, if I had woke up and they said, we have to see a counselor once a week for 1 month, twice a month for another couple months, and then intermittently and see if you're doing okay. And I said, you're right. I love my job. I love my apartment. I love my little dog. I can get through this. I'll just continue doing my education, and I'll join some kind of church group or bike group or, arts, something, line dancing or something, or maybe some of the other guys who actually were interested in you. But you know how love is. I persisted, and I got drunk, and I didn't drive, but I drank some Jack Daniels and on and on. So it just got out of hand, and that was it. I was leaving JSO. So that was November of 77. I'm out. But let's say, hypothetically, I wasn't out. If I wasn't out, I would have been sitting there with Lon King in the comm center, entering the stolen boats and entering the stolen air conditioners and marking down the signal 10s, the stolen cars and everything. I knew Jim Parmenter. I had seen Lieutenant Mickler because he knew Dottie McKinney. And they were like church or neighborhood buddies. They were just friends, not lovers, just friends, I guess. And I knew a lot of the players. I think Charlie Hill was doing something with computers and on and on. And they had forensics and all kind of stuff. If I had been sitting there in 1978, after the things happened in Tallahassee, instead I was on the outside going through all kind of heartache and troubles and trying to find a different career. And I'm running around, and I had a fender bender. And when my little Datsun had a fender bender, so I didn't have a car available. I think at the time it happened. I remember the report came in the newspaper, and I said, that's the guy. That's the guy we rode with 10 years ago, 10 and a half years ago. And I ran down to Mrs. Davis and I said, that's the guy we rode with. And she goes, which is odd, because it seemed like she would have said more than that. But maybe she knew I had all these other problems, so I don't know. But Mrs. Davis knew, my mother knew. Mrs. Sexton was still around, Debbie's mom, Sexton Hogue Sexton, whatever. They were all there. The Riviera Apartments were only 10 years, 8 months away, so somebody could have checked in to see who was subletting or who had that apartment. I could have showed them what the apartment was. But see, we didn't think about, when it came down and we saw this guy, it seemed like, oh man, he really was a freak. Look what he did in Washington and Utah and Colorado. He did stuff out there. We didn't know that he started at 20. He may have already started. I don't know. He was 20 and a half when we ran across him. We didn't know. There was no internet. There was no psychological profiles of serial killers. It was just, that we had some weirdos, but when it came down to me being on the outside of JSO, and then they caught this guy, they caught him. That was the end of it, right? And pretty much it is. But years later, I began to think, what if he did have a relationship with the family, a short, brief one from 67 to 69, and he's going to and from the East Coast, and he had maybe a relationship with one of them. I don't know. I don't know that. I swear to God. But I know when I put it out there and say, does anybody know anything about them 36 hours that he was in Jacksonville, and I put it on Nextdoor, I get a lot of hits. Like, I didn't know he had gone to the Roller Dome, and somebody ran him off from there because he was trying to pick up some girl or something. And then I didn't know he had gone to Evangel Temple looking for work. I didn't know these things until you come in and you put it on Next Door Neighbor, and people come back and reminisce and say, yes, and that was probably during 78 when he was in Jacksonville. But looking at it now from a broader sphere with that red Volkswagen, there are things that are very disturbing. We had a young girl named Virginia Helms, Helms, in Southside, that a couple said she was in a red Volkswagen on the north side and stunned and dazed in the back seat. And the guy jumped in the car and left a duffel bag. That should be checked for DNA, by the way. But chances are it's just something he stole. He could have come. They said, well, the dates that she went missing, it showed he bought gas in Murray. He bought gas in Murray. But that's not necessarily true, because he could have bought gas and told the clerk, don't run this through for a couple days. I'm going somewhere else, but my boss thinks I'm here, and I want it to appear that I was here on the 26th and 27th. So I'm going to buy a little gas, but just slide these through, later to make it look like I'm here, but I got to go somewhere else, So after the 25th, he could have come on into Jacksonville some kind of way. I mean, he could have. He was doing things. I think he did more than we know, as far as credit card theft, and he was ahead of his time with credit cards. He actually was ahead of his time with credit cards, and I think he was ahead of his time with telephones. I really do. He knew more about telephones and credit cards than most people in the 60s and early 70s would have known. That's my opinion. But still, you get the picture. If I had been sitting there with Lon, I would have said, hypothetically, and I got through my little situation, and I saw my counselor, and I said, you know what, there ain't no point. If somebody don't like you, find somebody else. But, if you're infatuated and you're young and you don't know any better, it doesn't work that way. But let's say it really did, and the light shone, and I said, yeah, I'm gonna do this job instead. But you see, there were negatives to the jobs. There were bigots. There were misogynists. I mean, it was like 99% of the guys are good, but that 1 or 2% that's bad are very bad, like Dennis Chauvin or something. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it was the ones that were bad were really, really dog shit people. I mean, so it's like, and had to testify against a bigoted judge. And then the other guy did a lot more than I'm going to go into detail. That Donald Wright, that's a pseudonym. He did more. He did a lot of little ugly things. He tried to make it where I could not even get employed. I went back there and said, you need to stop leaving me alone. I'm out now. I'm looking for gainful employment. And I said, I might go in the military. He said, I don't think you can get in the military. And I already took in the ass bath. I was already going into the reserves. And he sat there in my face, and then that's right then I said, I know you're behind the scenes doing stuff. My mom put a restraining order on him, by the way. She went down to see a Mr. Squires and said, no more, leave Mary alone. She has a right to gainful employment. She's only 22, 23 years old. Leave her alone, So anyway, there were some bad things, and there might have been residual from the 60s. There were some bad things down there. Not all. I'd say 88, 90% of people were good. I knew Mr. Parmenter. We knew him as Sergeant Parmenter, Jim Parmenter. Okay, so I made a long story short. I don't like to talk this long, and I don't feel that good anyway, so it's important for me to tell this. I'm telling the best that I can recall. Of course, I don't put myself in a terribly bad light, but I'm telling the truth. This is the whole truth, okay? If this had come down and I was sitting there with Lon, I said, Lon, I rode with that guy way back in 1967. He was, so we got to tell Rick Cox or something. And then maybe Dottie McKinney, maybe Sarah and Roger Howland. I said, Sarah and Roger Howland. This is a long time. So, I mean, I was very young. I wasn't there that long, 2.5 years. But if I had been sitting there, then they could have gone and seen Debbie's mom, who was bipolar and alcoholic. One time before I left, And I would remember how I said I would go to the booking office after midnight or 11 o'clock. Debbie's mom had a DUI, or DWI is what they call them, the driving while intoxicated. And she was mad as a wet hen, too. But anyway, I stayed over because it's a mother from the neighborhood. Screw JSO, it's a mother from the neighborhood, and she's going to get out on her own recognizance in a few hours. I'll drive her home. So I think I stayed over after the 11 o'clock. It might have been 3 to 11 that time. And I stayed over, and I drove her home, and I fully expected to go to 4110 Aldington. Instead, we went to Confederate Point Apartments. You know, there were like the Preserve and the Hermitage or Hermitage and the Confederate Point Apartments. And I was surprised. So she had sold the home. But I believe Bundy was coming looking for them because he had made friends with them over the years, believe it or not. And if I had been sitting there with Lon King, then the story would have been within JSO, and I would have had maybe the weight of JSO behind me, and Forrest could have bore on these people and said, oh, she's a Signal 27, she's crazy. I'm not crazy, I'm telling you the truth. If I had been on the inside, then a little Forrest could have been put on perhaps Miss Sexton. Of course, my mother would have been alive. She said, yeah, Mary talked about that right a few times. Mrs. Davis would have been alive. She said that. But I got the feeling when Miss Davis, like when I said that's the guy we rode with, it's because they knew that this guy had been coming to and from Jacksonville visiting Debbie and her sisters. So there's more to the story than you all know during that period. And I don't know how many years he came to and from. I know we took a letter up to supposedly him at Riviera Apartments, and it was a typewritten letter of several pages, like a Dear John letter or something, you know? Okay, so you let me know. But if I had been there, the apartment records could have been looked at. The note in the fence post might have still been at least enough paper to verify that I did throw it in there. Pressure could have been borne down on the three sisters and the mother. And pressure from the sheriff's office might have been enough pressure to say something. But now, if you put it out there, friends come back and say, they're just so vehement and so ugly and mean. So I'm thinking, why would you be that mean if all it was is we made a mistake and got in a car with a guy? That's not going to put your name with him forever. You could use a pseudonym and say, yeah, yes, we did that. It was very stupid, and that's all it was. And maybe that is all it was. But I get the feeling there's a little bit more to the story. Thank you, and good evening.